So welcome to a special edition of the Only Healthcare podcast. This episode is coming to you live from the Nicholas Hall North American Conference, where this is one of two panels that we're conducting to discuss some new FDA regulations on a pathway for additional condition non-prescription use. In this panel, we'll be talking about the need for change in consumer healthcare and transforming challenges into opportunities. So please enjoy this special episode of the Only Healthcare podcast. Welcome to a special episode of the Only Healthcare podcast, recording live from the Nicholas Hall 2025 North America Conference. It's a pleasure to be here with a live audience, as well as our esteemed panel that we have from the life sciences industry. We have a great episode in store for all of you. The topic that we're going to be covering in this episode is drivers of the expanding non-prescription drug market and looking beyond the OTC and switch. This episode is focused on the expansion of a market that you all serve or participate in with non-prescription access to drug treatment, an often overlooked segment of the healthcare ecosystem. Increasingly, such drug access is recognized as a major contributor to affordability, patient empowerment, and health equity. Perspectives on consumer access trends, including investments, employer benefits, commercial health plan coverage, are of particular interest to me as well as our audience, both in this live event and in our podcast. For today's live podcast, I'm joined by my guest co-host and thought leader on our topic today, Mary Alice Lawless. She brings deep experience in the drug product access and the role of non-prescription products, and someone I've known for many years, and we've worked together around healthcare consumerism in a lot of different ways. Welcome to the podcast, Mary Alice.
Thank you, Randy. I'm more than delighted to be here today with you and with our panelists, and it's my pleasure to introduce both of them to everybody. Start with Jim Parker, good friend and colleague of many years, and Jim is an expert on health policy. He'll bring us a lot of insights around those tailwinds driving so much of what we're seeing today in the space that we all work in. Jim has deep experience in the health plan arena, having been at Anthem, now Elevance Health, but even more recently, having been down at DC, working with Secretary Alex Azar as his strategic advisor for health reform during the first Trump administration. And to my right, Bob Sterling, another good friend and consumer healthcare industry veteran. We've all worked on, as Randy says, healthcare consumerism, this concept of consumers being empowered and engaged in a way that we haven't done before. And so Bob is here to talk a lot about how he sees this future from a healthcare perspective, and also through his lens as an expert in HCP marketing and the role that the HCPs may really play in the future. Back to you, Randy.
All right. Great for doing those introductions and to have this expert panel with us today. So we're going to dive in first with Jim talking about what's been happening in self-care policy and how did we get to where we're at today and where things are going to be headed very shortly. So Jim?
Great. Well, thank you, Randy. It may seem like this era of consumerism and all of these activities that have occurred recently are new on the scene, but in fact, they've been percolating beneath the surface for some time. FDA realized more than a decade ago that our approach to non-prescription access would have to be modernized to facilitate a next generation of products. This was the birth of what we now know as the final rule for non-prescription access to drug products with an additional condition for use. And all of us in this room, I think, are now familiar with it as what we refer to as ACNU. ACNU went into effect just 4 months ago on May 27th. This new regulatory pathway is the product of an FDA effort over many years and the first major regulatory change to U.S. drug law since the 1951 Durham Humphrey Amendment, which formally established our two-class drug system. What's so important is that ACNU doesn't stand alone. It's part of a policy matrix that the current administration is seeking to empower consumers with that supports the use of data, technology, and services that can be used to increase their individual competence and confidence in self-care. We think this movement is good for people and good for the already overburdened U.S. healthcare system. If you look at the slide that's on our screen, you can see 3 separate actions that the administration has already taken this year. First, on April 15th, the White House issued an executive order that included a specific provision, Section 9B, calling for more non-prescription drug candidates. That doesn't happen every day. Since that time, both HHS Secretary Kennedy and FDA Commissioner McCary have made repeated public statements about the importance of non-prescription access to drug products. Not soon thereafter, on May 27th, we had the ACNU rule go into effect. And on June 4th, then acting director of CDER, Dr. Corrigan Curry, testified at the Senate Help Committee that, quote, "We have a new tool that's going to be very powerful and effective for us to move from prescription to OTC access." Finally, on this chart, you can see that on June 17th, Commissioner McCary included all drugs, NDAs and BLAs, prescription and non-prescription, in the Commissioner's National Priority Voucher Program to speed up review and approval. And just 2 weeks ago, Dr. Teresa Michelle included NDA, ANDA, and BLA as ACNU eligible candidates on her slides at the RSQ conference in Washington. In my view, this is historic. We've never seen such emphasis on non-prescription access, particularly from the regulatory community.
I think what's really interesting about that, and I think important for everyone in the industry to recognize, is that they aren't using switch necessarily. That's not a term that's in any of these policy documents, and they're not using OTC. That non-prescription access can have a new definition and really be achieved in new ways. Interestingly, I think this was on September 6th. I think that's the dateline on this paper, but this position paper just appeared in Stat News that is up on the screen, and I'm sure the podcast folks will have it to see as well. And it's a Brown University Medical School teaching fellow who wrote this, and so this is very contemporary about the importance of perhaps having non-prescription access to statins. I know everybody has heard this story before. So the public health case for this hasn't changed since it was originally tried with Mevacor and even Provocol before that, and it continues to be very important, but it's also a gigantic population. So Bob, you had experience with the Merck Mevacor program.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about that with us, and thinking through not only what was the opportunity, but what stopped it, and
Right.
How can we think about that differently now?
Well, I think it's important to start with the statistics, although many of you may be very aware of them. What we know is this. We know that the FDA supports a claim that statins can prevent stroke and can prevent heart attacks. What we also know is that about 86 million Americans have high cholesterol. And the challenge with that is this: only a third of them have their cholesterol under control. That's a big lack of compliance right there. So you fast forward to what the opportunity is, Mary Alice, and the opportunity is this. If we were able to get access to statins for more consumers in the US, we'd be able to reduce the number of coronary events by hundreds of thousands in a year. And when you talk about cost savings, it's staggering. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars of cost to the healthcare system. So it's a big opportunity, and I think it really plays into the ACNU. Now, what I'm going to do now is go back in a history lesson, and I'm going to date myself a little bit. In the mid-'90s to late 90s, I worked on the Mevacor switch. And really we looked at what I just mentioned, and still is as a public health challenge. And so we wanted to try to solve that. And so we got together for years and tried to find a way to bring Mevacor over the counter. But we were doing it through the lens of trying to get it at the shelf so consumers could purchase it, have access to it, and try to lower their cholesterol levels. As we embarked on that journey, the unfortunate part was there were 4 what I would call hurdles we had to face. Number one was really that concern about controlling drug-drug interactions. The second one was the ability to avoid consumers downstreaming from the correct higher dose or higher therapeutic dose of Mevacor. Third one is, are consumers going to take this product that don't need it? And then lastly, I would say more of age restrictions. And so those are some of the challenges we faced, and let's face it, those were insurmountable. But that was then, and this is now. And I think with the advent of the ACNU, you have a situation now when you just think about the technological advances that have happened in the 25 to 30 years since then. Right. You think about the reams of data that are available, and importantly, think about, I would say, consumer readiness. And this is a really important topic. I would say, and I mentioned this to all of you last week, I think there was a point in time where consumers just wanted the prescription in their hand, and it had placebo effect. It was like, right, I feel better already. I think times have changed, and I think consumers today want to empower themselves through self-care. And I think the ACNU is going to provide a pathway to potentially make that possible, and that's going to have great public health implications. Importantly, it's also going to provide commercial opportunities, and it's going to improve the quality of life.
And I think that the, non-compliance rates, 1 in 3, which we have today, were really the same when you were working on Mevacor. That doesn't change. So, and in the research with consumers, this was not necessarily consumer research. It really was done on the pharma side. But, why are patients not compliant? Well, there are a myriad of reasons. And largely it has to do, and it's exacerbated by the fact that, there aren't enough providers to treat the people, as one of our colleagues always likes to say. Pharmacy hours are cut. If you show up at noon, they might be on lunch break. If you show up at 7, the pharmacy's closed, even though the front of the store is open. And, it's just a sort of an abrasive consumer experience now to, go down that prescription pathway. However, I will say that FDA and the owners of these products in most cases realize the target market is not the treaters. In most cases, that's probably not going to be what FDA would like to see. Not necessarily trying to disrupt compliant and stable chronic risk factors, treaters. They're looking for those undertreaters and non-treaters and to find a way to bring them in. And I think it ties back to, Bob, to what you just said, which is a lot of these folks, especially if they're early on their, sort of treatment regimen, they don't want to think of themselves as sick. And so when they can access this drug product in a setting that doesn't feel like they're sick and they're in the medical system, it's just a different vibe.
Yeah.
So statin drugs were and continue to be viable candidates. FDA, of course, listed 4 disease states back in 2012 that they were looking at and really basically founded the rule on, which is high cholesterol, which we're talking about, hypertension, or cardiovascular risk profile in general, asthma, and migraine. And since that time, the agencies talked about diabetes. And you can see by virtue of Dr. Michel's chart, I think we saw there, and Jim's reference to it, and I think Dr. McCarry's, that although the rule talks about NDAs, FDA actually is accepting BLA submissions under the ACNU rule as well. So we get this question all the time, Jim. Okay, but isn't there like a whole health plan wall that we'd have to climb? I mean, what's going to happen with the health plans? How are they going to, look at this? And I know, Randy, with your, as a pharmacist and with your background working with employers and health plans too, you've seen even the GLP-1s put on the table. Like, isn't there some indication and some utilization segment for a product like GLP-1s that perhaps should be available with the support of this additional condition? What do you think, Jim? What are health plans really looking for?
Well, I think first of all, let me take a step back. I think from the standpoint of FDA, they think of this opportunity as being deregulatory in nature. They don't view this as simply another way to apply a regulatory framework or a regulatory viewpoint to industry. They're truly interested in how they motivate individuals who are not in a treatment regimen today, but for whom they know a regimen is necessary to get into a treatment protocol. And so that's really been their motivating driver throughout this entire exercise is how do we create a framework that makes that possible, that isn't limiting by the strictures we might put in place. And so, but at the same time, they're also bound to maintain the public safety. And so they start with the fact that for many of these treatments, there are safety issues that would preclude an individual from taking the treatment without some degree of safety involvement or safety strictures being put in place. How do they do that with the least amount of restrictions in place at all? And so that's where the ACNU solution becomes so interesting. And so that's where their deregulatory perspective becomes important. So they really do think of this as deregulatory.
Yeah.
And again, it's motivated by their interest in reducing undertreatment. They're also, I would say, another thing that's motivating to them is a recognition that one of the significant reasons why you do have such a degree of undertreatment and noncompliance is the absolute limitations that exist today on the clinical workforce. I mean, it's just very challenging and difficult to access care. Even if you recognize that you have a medical issue that you want to go into treatment for, it's very difficult to schedule an appointment, receive care, and get yourself into a regimen. And so how do you do that in a way that allows you to access and leverage technology in ways that weren't available before? And so again, so that's what makes ACNU such an interesting proposition today in a way that wasn't available in the past. From a plan's perspective, I think it's also an interesting way to reduce healthcare costs. I mean, let's not be naive about this. Plans carry a number of different interests and priorities. Certainly, they have an interest in managing or reducing costs. They have an interest in managing and improving quality, and ACNU can be an interesting way to achieve both. They can bring people into care, which improves quality, and they can do so by minimizing the cost of bringing them into a relationship with the clinical community, which oftentimes is near impossible to do. And so you can leverage technology in that way from a plan's perspective.
Did you have health plans on your docket during the Mevacor?
We did. We were able to really get support from key opinion leaders, healthcare professionals, and I'd say indirectly health plans and employers, but remember the Mevacor launch was meant to be a massive retail launch. So access was not really what we were looking for at that point in time. We just wanted to have it on the shelf to allow consumers to make the decision if that was right for them. But again, now with ACNU or ACNU, I think it's a lot different because if plans are looking to provide these products, they're going to need to have the support. They're going to need in order to get them on formulary or to give access. So clearly now with ACNU, you are going to need health plans and employers to participate to make the right decisions
Yeah.
regarding access.
That sort of has to be shaped because, Randy, you were saying
Yep.
just the other day that, or just a minute ago, that really we may very well see the resurgence of more funding of FSAs, more funding of HRAs, MSAs. Maybe you want to speak to that for a sec.
Yes, all the A's are in play again. As we heard this morning from Nicholas in his opening presentation, how the market shifts are becoming more dramatic, particularly as you look at the generational components within the channel of the consumer. It's not how we normally speak in the employer world, but when we start looking at where some of these opportunities to reduce the year-over-year increases that we've been seeing for decades in the healthcare plans. So you can have employers that are, they are the plan, they're self-funded, and you can have employers that are purchasing benefit plans, places like what Jim was working at and continues to work with. So this whole issue around access becomes really interesting because that's a big gating mechanism to how do you control cost. And so today, right now, it's either prescription or over the counter. So it's a yes or no kind of scenario. Am I going to cover it or not cover it? And what we're seeing already, and we'll continue to see more of in 26, are plans becoming more skinny, which means less coverage, more out-of-pocket costs shifted onto the consumer. So a better consumer option becomes a more viable play. So the question for both Bob and to Jim, as we start looking forward, and now with ACNU available as a tool, and by the way, most people don't understand what we're even talking about, and probably most of the audience that listen to this podcast don't understand a lot of this. And that's part of the reason why we're doing this, is to help educate everybody about this opportunity. But in talking with health plans in the past and working with health plans in the past, we start looking forward now, particularly for 26 and beyond in the next 10 years. How do you think things have changed, and how fast are they going to look to adopt the opportunity that ACNU brings to the table?
Boy, that's a great question, and I would say there will be, it won't be uniform. There will be some plans that will be early adopters. There will be other plans that will wait and see. It's just the nature of the beast, and so for those going into the market, you'll just have to be cognizant of that and accept it. But that doesn't make the opportunity any less real.
Yeah, it does. I think there's a factor there to consider that may work, at least be a dynamic in the consideration, which is that the plans and the PBMs and the retail pharmacies are really the owners of the holder. They generate the data, so they technically own that data, and that data gets reported up to central, repositories like SureScripts, for example. But who owns SureScripts? Cigna. So there's a health plan. NACDS. So there's all the retailers. So I mean, it's almost like the ecosystem is a little bit of a closed loop, and maybe there'll be a little more unison than we can imagine right now.
Yeah, I would just say I agree with what you said, Jim, and I think the one piece I'd add in there is it's always good to differentiate, and I think it's a little bit of a copycat industry, and so I think what can happen here is whoever wants to be that first mover, they're going to be looked upon really closely, and there'll be pressure on other plans to replicate or improve upon because it's just so competitive.
Right. Yes, exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not unusual to see the bell-shaped curve in action in that regard, for sure. So as I think about it from my pharmacy background and having worked in retail myself years ago, and continue to be involved on behalf of employers and other commercial plans that I've worked with, and all the changes that are happening, ACNU is yet another change that they have to start thinking about. So reflecting back on who's really driving in the marketplace, the question, and I'll ask you, Jim, Are the retailers preparing to do anything? Are they already engaged in this? Are they excited about this? What have you been hearing and the overall receptivity of this opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the retailers are really important to this, because they are how these products get distributed, into consumers' hands. They're really interested and excited about this. Let's not forget, we're talking about, for the most part, how we're going to distribute treatments and solutions to individuals who aren't in a care regimen today. And so for some products, we're talking about an expansion of a product to up to a third of the addressable market that isn't purchasing today. That's pretty significant, not only for the manufacturers, but also for the supply chain that distributes that product into the market. And so that's how the retailers think about that as well. And so they're excited to hear how we think about it, what our plans are, what are our thoughts, what are the products that we're thinking about taking to market, and they're looking forward to those conversations.
Yeah, in the conversations that I've been a party to, we've heard a lot about just don't do what you did to us with FSA products, like no warning, nothing planned, a complete scramble. You remember these days, and or even the BTC products, the D products and so on. That's sort of a hassle for retail. So they're looking for this process to be much more elegant, much more forethought, and that's really what the opportunity is right now, to do that work together and to create a consumer journey. I know our next session we'll talk a little bit about the marketing piece, but to create a consumer experience that's fantastic, that sort of becomes a opportunity to leapfrog into a whole new paradigm of what we can do in terms of marketing to consumers, supporting them, empowering them, educating them, and basically being a companion on an ongoing basis. I forget whose slide had the perpetuity word up there. I think it was the M&A slide, maybe Kevin. We're talking about products that are in the market in perpetuity. So if that relationship can be cemented with that consumer who now has to be known by virtue of FDA's rule, holding on to that relationship will become golden.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, Jim, that you've thought a little bit about those behind-the-counter products and restrictions. Anything that you think further on that?
Well, as FDA was considering how to expand access to products to today, which either require a prescription or can qualify as over-the-counter, it occurred to me that we already have a limited experience with products today that require behind-the-counter distribution. And so as we build out capabilities to respond to these ACNU opportunities, there's also an opportunity to modernize our current approach to what we all think of as the D products. And so it just occurs to me that we shouldn't lose sight of that as well. And I'm going to go out on a limb.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to try to pronounce dextromethorphan and loperamide.
Go ahead, Bob.
How did I do, Bob?
Dextromethorphan. 1 out of 2 is not too bad. We worked on this for a while.
Dextromethorphan.
Very good.
Being someone who's not a
You're
pharmacist.
surrounded by a pharmacist and a product expert, so
Yes.
you're forgiven.
I feel I'm in good hands, and I'm not afraid to be corrected. But I think as we all become more comfortable with these capabilities and the tools that enable these capabilities, we'll begin to see that there are other applications that we can deploy them to as well. And because what we'll come to appreciate is that while we have a 2-class system, and we may live with that for some time, the real world is not as black or white. And we'll come to appreciate what the FDA has done for us, and that the additional condition framework will give us the opportunity to apply those additional conditions to a variety of use cases that will only benefit the consumer and all of us who seek to serve them.
So we think about the consumer and staying on that front for a moment, because obviously there was some foresight. This has been going on for a long time. What are the real savings and opportunities for the consumer in this, both the FDA's research and Bob, whatever you may have had in your experience?
Well, to me, the savings is dramatic. What's not going to change is pressure on consumers' wallet. And so there really is an opportunity here for there to be some vigilance, for there to be, at the end of the day, it comes down to access. Mm-hmm. And I think the ACNU is going to provide the opportunity for every member of the ecosystem to win. Because if there's greater access, and the term I like to use is better quality of life, if there is a way to provide better quality of life for consumers who are suffering from any number of conditions, and it's easier for them to get the product, and it's going to be more cost effective, it's a win across the board. I think it's as simple as that. Now, the execution part of it certainly can get more complex, but if that's the North Star, I think we'll be in good shape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of the classic illustration of, the duck paddling under the water and
right.
sailing smooth at the top. I mean, the consumer experience has to be, frictionless and actually positive.
It does, has to be
reinforcing, turnkey. Yes. There's work to be done on the back end, if you will, but that's where, as you mentioned before, we have such incredible technology capabilities, data capabilities, and
right.
other capabilities today that we didn't have during the Medicore program.
Yeah, and I even look at, there are a number of products and clearly can be affected here, but I even look at a product like CBD that I think needs to be part of the conversation, because there's a large portion of the population that have unmet need of pain relief, and I think CBD is something that can help that. Now, the problem was when that first came out, it was kind of like the wild, wild west. Yeah. So many manufacturers involved, everyone trying to win, but they were using CBD, for example, that was oil-based, and oil-based CBD does not absorb correctly. And so I think it was important that the FDA asked Congress to provide some oversight, to help them understand, long-term use and to look at usage or restrict usage with children, adolescents, and vulnerable populations. So I think the ACNU really creates this pathway for a product like CBD where, they'll be able to put in quantity limits. They'll be able to do age restrictions and have this access to a non-prescription product that can really help. And there's a product out there called NextEvo that has solved the oil piece of it with technology and can provide the absorption that's needed, and already has good manufacturing processes or principles and has good process principles. So I think there are opportunities here for innovators as well to be able to be part of this ecosystem that can benefit everyone.
Mm-hmm. There was an industry meeting last week, I think it was, down in the DC area, RSQ, with FDA, and Dr. Teresa Michelle, who's really the author of the rule, primary author, I should say. I mean, there are a lot of other contributors, and she just said exactly that. She said, we wrote this rule and we want to encourage everyone to think broadly about it. Don't think narrowly about this. Don't think about one aspect or one drug or one population. Think broadly,
right.
And really step into this future in a position of shaping it, versus sort of deducting that it's going to be challenging. Yeah,
the analogy, it's often overused, but I still like it. It skate towards where the puck is going as opposed to where the puck is.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's how people are going to be successful here.
Mm-hmm. So we've covered a lot of information. I'm going to try and work in a couple quick questions here before we have to close this session out. What is the difference between implementation and operationalizing this in terms of the FDA ACNU rule. And I'll start with Jim, since you were in on a lot of that, along with Mary Alice, can add in some additional color.
Well, certainly there is the implementation is one element of it, and the implementation is important, but the operationalization of the ACNU framework is perhaps even more important, and it differs from a switch in particular because it requires an ongoing tracking of the product and your ability to accurately and effectively document that you have maintained compliance with the conditions themselves, and that the individual who received the product was in fact the person that applied for the product and accurately and correctly received the product that they applied for. And in many ways, I think it has a tremendous market advantage and market value in that for the first time, as a company marketing that product, you know who has your product with tremendous granularity. And from the FDA's perspective, they have a tremendous ability to access the consumer to whom the product's been marketed, if in fact there was ever a need for a recall.
I like to think of it under another euphemism. Begin with the end in mind. Like, we have to understand what is the consumer going to experience. That's the operationalization part of this. Implementation is the actual program that's running, the additional condition and how it's delivered and what data is, gathered and what the, sort of check marks are that have to be gotten through in order for the consumer to gain access. So we sort of have implementation is the technical aspect of all of this and what ends up in the NDA and that FDA approves. FDA has said in the rule, we're actually not going to regulate operationalization, but we want to know how it's going to happen because they want to know that consumers the mass market will have access to this product. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for a public health return. And if the operationalization is too abrasive or too narrow, they want to know that in advance, and they may have something to say about it.
Another question, kind of building off of that, is what are we expecting in terms of exclusivity for new products with a ACNU?
I mean, I think that FDA said nothing changes about exclusivity. If you have to do a clinical study, an actual use trial, which all of these products will need because we're going to have to prove the additional condition program anyway, then you'll get your typical 3 years of exclusivity, which, again, I throw it to the marketers, gives you 3 years to lock down these relationships and become the best friend, long-term companion in perpetuity to those consumers. But there may be some other things. Obviously, there's IP in an additional condition program. The algorithms, for example, are not published. Everybody who wants to bring forth a similar drug in the same drug class will essentially start from scratch. They can maybe reverse engineer what the consumer sees, which is the labeling or the information that's sort of exchanged in the digital program or however it's delivered. But what's happening behind the scenes, what's happening with data queries, they'll have to do that. Each group will have to do that for themselves. But everybody will get more familiar with doing that pretty quickly, and it will become not insurmountable in any way, shape, or form. Actually, sort of fun.
Okay. Closing comment, Jim?
My comments would only be that I'm in an unusual position of being very bullish on a government action. I mean, I've spent my entire career petitioning the government, asking them why they went as far as they did. Couldn't they reconsider? But in this case, I think the government, and for the most part, got it right. And I would encourage all of us to consider how we take advantage of what was really 10 years of serious work.
Bob, closing comment?
I would just say embrace this. Embrace ACNU. I think the time is now. And, like you said, there's been years, if not decades, of work done here. And for it to get formalized on May 27th, it means that there is an expectation that this gets acted upon. So I would just say embrace this.
So for our healthcare audience that's listening online to this episode, I want to thank you for tuning in once again. And for those here in the room listening to this episode that is unique, talking about a opportunity that hadn't existed before, is a significant change, as we've been talking about. A lot of details remain to be seen. There's a lot of interest in talking to the insurance community, the employer community, the retailers. So there's a lot of momentum, and the timing seems to be good from everyone that I've been talking with in my world, which is a little bit different than the world that we're sitting with here in this particular room. But keep listening to the Only Healthcare podcast. It's available, as well as go to the website, onlyhealthcarepodcast.com. And thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this panel conversation talking about going beyond over-the-counter drugs and switches, and what are some of the policy shifts that the ACNU rule brings to the table in the U.S. marketplace. We will have another panel that will be going into more detail on some of the consumer-related issues, so please look forward to seeing that episode drop, and enjoy the Only Healthcare podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Only Healthcare podcast. We hope you found today's episode insightful and informative. Remember, our mission is to provide actionable and inspirational insights on how we can improve healthcare cost, care, and accessibility for all. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and share with your friends and family. For more resources and updates, visit us at onlyhealthcarepodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what topics you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. Until next time, stay informed, and together, let's navigate the journey to better healthcare.